There is a simple physical test, one that takes less than 15 seconds, that quietly separates men in their 60s into two very different groups. It requires no equipment, no gym membership, and no appointment with a specialist. Most men have never heard of it. Almost no one has ever been asked to try during a routine checkup. And yet, according to researchers who study functional aging, how a man performs on this one test says more about his physical strength, his fall risk, and even his long-term independence than almost any other simple marker available outside of a hospital. The test itself will be laid out in full detail shortly, along with exactly what it reveals and how it's scored. But first, it's worth understanding why this particular movement matters so much, because the answer explains something most men have never had explained to them clearly. The difference between looking strong and actually being functionally strong, in the way that matters for staying independent for decades to come. By the end of this video, the full test will be described step by step, along with a clear breakdown of what different results mean and, most importantly, exactly how to improve if the result isn't what you were hoping for. Because here's the encouraging part. This is not a test of youth. It's a test of a specific kind of strength that can be rebuilt at almost any age. Once a man understands exactly what to train, stay through this, because the number that separates the top performers from everyone else may be lower than you expect, and higher than you'd think possible to reach with the right approach. Why this particular ability matters. So much most men, when they think about strength, picture something visible. The ability to lift something heavy, to look strong in a mirror. But the kind of strength that predicts how well a man ages isn't primarily about how much weight he can move. It's about something researchers call functional strength, the ability to control and coordinate the body's own weight through everyday movements, repeatedly, without strain. This distinction matters because muscle mass and functional strength don't always decline together at the same rate. A man can retain a reasonable amount of muscle while losing the coordinated strength and endurance needed to repeatedly rise from a seated position, a movement almost every man performs dozens of times a day without ever thinking about it. Right up until the day it becomes noticeably harder. This is exactly why researchers studying aging populations have turned to a specific, simple test involving repeated chair rises as one of the most telling functional assessments available. It doesn't require a gym. It doesn't require special equipment. It simply asks the body to do, in a controlled and measured way, something it's supposed to be able to do easily for a lifetime. The test, explained in full here, is exactly how it works. Sitting in a standard chair without arms, with feet flat on the floor and arms crossed over the chest, the goal is to stand up fully and sit back down again as many times as possible in 30 seconds. Without using the hands or arms for assistance at any point. That's the entire test. No warm-up routine, no special posture, nothing complicated. Just controlled, repeated rises from a seated position, using nothing but the legs, hips, and core. This version of the test, often referred to in research literature as the 30-second chair stand test, has been studied extensively as a marker of lower body strength and functional capacity in older adults. It's used by physical therapists and researchers specifically because it's simple enough to perform almost anywhere, yet demanding enough to reveal real differences in strength and endurance that aren't always obvious from how a person looks or moves in daily life. What the numbers actually mean based on published research benchmarks for men in their 60s, here's roughly how performance tends to break down. Completing around 12 to 14 full repetitions in 30 seconds generally falls into an average range for men in this age group. A reasonable, unremarkable result that suggests adequate but unremarkable functional strength. Completing fewer than 10 repetitions tends to fall into a below-average range and can be an early signal of declining lower body strength that's worth paying attention to, particularly if it's paired with other signs, like difficulty with stairs, or a general sense of stiffness getting up from low. Surfaces, completing 16 or more. Repetitions puts a man solidly into an above-average range relative to most others his age. The kind of result that reflects genuinely strong functional capacity in exactly the muscles most responsible for independence later in life, the quadriceps, glutes, hip flexors, and the core stabilizers that keep the whole system coordinated. And reaching numbers in the high teens or beyond places a man among a smaller group who have maintained a level of functional strength that, Frankly, most people 2 or 3 decades younger don't reach either. If that describes you, the confidence in that headline is entirely earned. Why this test predicts more than it seems to at first glance. It might seem strange that something as simple as sitting and standing repeatedly could reveal much of anything. But this specific movement pattern draws on several systems simultaneously: leg strength, hip stability, core control, balance, and muscular endurance, making it a uniquely efficient snapshot of overall functional capacity. This is also precisely the movement pattern most closely tied to real-world independence. Getting up from a chair, a car seat, a low couch, off the toilet, these aren't occasional challenges. They're actions repeated dozens of times daily, and the strength required to perform them easily is the same strength that protects against falls, supports mobility, and preserves independence as the decades pass. Researchers have consistently found associations between poor performance on tests like this one and increased risk of falls, reduced mobility, and greater difficulty with daily activities in older populations. It isn't that struggling with this test causes those outcomes directly. It's that the test reveals an underlying decline in the exact strength systems that, left unaddressed, tend to lead there. A common mistake that skews the result. There's one mistake worth mentioning before trying this test, because it's common enough to throw off the result entirely. Many men, especially those who haven't done much structured movement recently, instinctively use momentum, rocking forward, using the arms even slightly, or leaning heavily on one leg to compensate for weaker areas. This can make the number look better than the underlying strength actually is. For an accurate result, the movement needs to be controlled rather than rushed, with the arms genuinely staying crossed over the chest throughout, and each rise reaching a full standing position before sitting back down. A slower, cleaner set of repetitions gives a far more honest picture than a faster, sloppier one. And honestly, that same principle applies to the training that follows. Quality of movement matters more than speed, both in the test and in the practice that improves it. What to do if your number wasn't what you hoped? The encouraging reality is that this specific kind of functional strength responds remarkably well to targeted training, even in men who haven't done any structured exercise in years. Start with basic sit-to-stand practice itself. Practicing slow, controlled chair rises, even using the arms for light support at first, directly trains the exact muscles and coordination pattern the test measures, which makes it one of the most efficient exercises available for improving this specific number. Add resistance to the same movement pattern. Body weight squats, and eventually squats with light added resistance. Reinforce the same muscle groups with greater strength building demand, accelerating improvement beyond what chair rises alone provide. Train the glutes and hip flexors directly. Exercises like glute bridges and standing hip flexor work address the supporting muscle groups that contribute significantly to overall performance on this test, but are sometimes underdeveloped even in men who train other areas regularly. Prioritize consistency over intensity. 2 to 3 short sessions a week, focused specifically on these movement patterns, tend to produce measurable improvement within 4 to 6 weeks for most men, a timeline that surprises many people. Given how significant the functional gains tend to be the real takeaway, this test isn't really about the number itself. It's about what that number represents, a level of coordinated strength that quietly determines how a man moves through the next 20 or 30 years of his life. The ability to rise from a chair without hesitation, again and again, without a second thought, is exactly the kind of strength that protects independence long after other. More visible measures of fitness have stopped mattering as much. And here's what makes this genuinely encouraging. Unlike many aspects of aging, this one responds directly and predictably to effort. A man who scores poorly today has every reason to expect meaningful improvement within weeks of consistent, targeted practice, not years. This video is intended for general educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Anyone with existing joint issues, balance concerns, recent injuries, or cardiovascular conditions should consult a qualified healthcare provider or physical therapist before attempting this test or beginning a new exercise routine. If you tried this test while watching, drop your number in the comments. And if it wasn't what you hoped, know that the path to a stronger result starts with nothing more than a chair and a few minutes a day.